work part-time for Eden Rivers Trust, an NGO. I also run my own agricultural consultancy business, which has swung much more to environmental consultancy over the last few years, as we've tended to be pushed more into that sort of realm. I also, interesting, I was thinking coming up the road here today, how, Peter's alluded to that in terms of environmental land management. Where are we with that process? We're a long way, I think, still from where we need to be. And today we'll probably take you down a road where I think I'm going to do the depressing bit, and then hopefully Tim and others will bring you back up again. But hopefully what I'm going to say right at the end might just give you a bit more of where we think we might be heading, and therefore what might be the benefits, drawing on a lot of what we've spoken about today. And it's interesting just thinking about what we've seen today, but how we then begin to sort of make this all begin to move together. We've spent 4 years or so discussing with DEFRA about where environmental land management is heading and what we're doing. And I think at long last, we are now beginning to see a slight narrowing of our focus to then start to bring this all together. Interestingly, just before I start, 2 things that I've picked out of what we've been talking about so far is, I work with Farmer Network in terms of looking at the Prince's Farm Resilience Programme. And I've looked at a lot of business accounts in the last 4 to 5 weeks. And the ones that really stand out to me, that really give you the best benefit and the best insight into those businesses, are the ones we've talked about, where the accountant is working hard on your behalf to draw out the information on individual enterprises. And if you take anything away from Dyer, I would say go and camp on your accountant's doorstep and say, that's the information we need, guys. Because without that information, we can't begin that process of then looking as to how we're then going to get the benefits out of environmental land management, sustainable farming incentive, and all these other things coming down the road, because we need to understand how the individual enterprises on our farms work to then work out how we're then going to take those businesses forward. And the second thing before I get started really is thinking back 30 years ago when I started managing an estate in central Scotland, where the pressure from and that was 13,000 acres, of which about 11,000 acres was fairly open hill and rising to about 3,000 feet. The pressure then with the 3,000 red deer herd on that farm, along everything else, well, that was running over another sort of 40-odd thousand acres, but in a case it was coming into that area. The pressure from the stalkers was that they needed the sheep off the fell, they needed the sheep away, because that was impacting on the grouse and was impacting on the red deer management. So out of 7,000 ewes when I started, we got rid of 4,000, so we went down to 3,000. And then 12 years later, the stalkers came back to us and said, we could do the sheep back on the fell again, because in that 12-year period, what had happened was we'd shifted the balance, and we'd put cattle back up there to try and address the balance. But the main balance there, and it was in terms of the deer welfare, because those are the days when we were dipping sheep with OP dips. Although we weren't controlling the tick on the deer, the sheep were taking enough ticks on them that were then going back onto the deer again, and we were killing those ticks with the OPs, so they weren't going back onto the deer again. So by removing 4,000 sheep from that ecosystem, we then allowed the tick population to accelerate within the red deer population and within the grouse population to the extent where it was then decimating both of those. And we were seeing severe welfare problems on that estate from the red deer in the wintertime, because they were just carrying such a huge tick burden. So we have to be very careful how we adjust ecosystems and how we change things, because actually by doing that one thing, get the sheep off, get more grass, get more this, improve that. Actually, what we didn't do, what the stalkers hadn't realised, was that we would then change the balance within the other ecosystem that was out there in terms of the tick population. So we have, there we go, got another one. You'll know this already, you'll have heard enough about this, I don't need to labour the point really. Scheme 1, Sustainable Farming Incentive. We're dealing with a number of pilots in my professional work. Scheme 2, Local Nature Recovery, and Scheme 3, Landscape Recovery, and I'll come to talk onto that more about how we as an NGO are looking to be much more involved in that. So SFI pilot, as we've heard today, is on the process now of starting. They're starting to dribble out. I've got about 7 on the go, and the 2 of those came out last night to evaluate and see where we're going there. And that pilot will last for 3 years. and then we may be able to make amendments to those from May 2022. SFI 2022 is billed to start next year, and as Julie has said, basically those in the pilot, if you've got existing stewardship across your whole farm, you couldn't be part of the pilot. If you had it on part of your farm, and I've got those that have got it a part of their farm, are involved in those pilots. So the pilot consists of 8 standards. Can everybody see if I stand here? Is that all right? Yeah. Each of which is split into 3 levels. So if I move back a bit, are you going right there? Yeah. Of ambition, and the 8 standards at the moment are as they are there. Okay. So the pilots are looking at how farms can manage each of those, use each of those standards to then help bring more income in. And each of those 8 standards is then divided into 3 levels of ambition. So introductory, intermediate, and advanced. And you get paid more as you do more down each of those. So I'll put those all up. I think we get that there. Yep, there we go. So that's the idea of the payments that we're going to be looking at. Okay. Now, as I say, most of this you'll probably know already, but it's just working out, where we are with this MSO. And if we've taken BPS out of that equation, and we've taken stewardship out of that equation, then what are we going to put back in there, to sort of, once we get to the MSO, to then, add value. And if you think of BPS over the last few years, basic payment has been probably somewhere in the region of, 260, 270 a hectare, that kind of figure, for upland and lowland farms, around the £100 an acre mark. Okay, £90, £100 an acre mark. You can see there, although you can stack those standards on top of each other, that we're a long, long way short of that figure. A long way short. I've got one pilot farm that is basically looking to replace all of his, we've assessed his farm as how he then replaces all of his BPS with sustainable farming incentive payments within the pilot. He's got no stewardship at the moment. And the closest we can get, without then starting to look at how that farm performs, i.e. maintain the status quo, carry on as you are, the closest we can get is about 30% of his basic payment. Okay, so we are a long way short of where we are. So all of this about, as Chris said with MSO, really then becomes right to the fore, right to the top, because we need to know where our MSO is. Because as soon as we take BPS out of the equation and stewardship out of the equation, we've got to know how these businesses are performing before we can then look and see what extra value we can then bring in to then help drive.
My understanding then was that stewardship payments would be additional to SFI.
No. At the moment, SFI is going to gradually come in, and if we see SFI 22 coming in, and we'll talk about that just in a minute as what we're going to be. SFI 22 is only going to be 3 standards, 2 soils, uplands, and then the animal health and welfare programme. As in Scheme 2 and Scheme 3, so local nature recovery and landscape recovery? Local nature recovery.
Yeah. So those payments will be, you can have those as well as SFI?
As far as we're aware, we don't know yet. I can't get that answer yet. Anybody else got that answer yet?
Yeah, that's the intention.
It's the intention, yeah.
They may effectively underpin. So currently, remember UELS and HLS? People like UELS and HLS, they took a little bit off your HLS payment to ensure there wasn't double taxing.
Yeah.
So as Andy said, there's a lot unknown. There was a detail in the
Is there any difference like for SDA now? Or?
Well, there is.
Yes. Yep. If you go back to, so you improve grassland standard and you lower no input grassland standard, they are reflecting effectively where your management is there. But there's no SDA, there's no LFA, there's none of that. Or that will still be there. Don't get me wrong.
But there's not payment
No.
differentiate?
No. The only thing that will come in next year, which Julie and I have been working on in terms of is likes of uplands payments and moorland payments and things, the moorland standards and things like that. So there is recognition that we're not stuck on the 8 standards. There could be 12 by the time we actually get there or more at the end of the day. Sorry, somebody was going to ask a question. Yeah.
My understanding was that you can apply for it on parts of the farm that aren't in scheme.
That's right, yeah.
So you can, it's not that you can't do it, you just can't do it on the parcels that are in existing scheme.
That's right, but the pilot was initially set up that basically, if you wanted to join the pilot, then you had to basically have vacant land, land with nothing going on other than basic payment, to then engage with the pilot. But hopefully, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the thought is that SFI 2022, particularly as it's the 2 soil standards, and they're not really covered by anything at the moment. We had the old soil management plans under single farm payment, but we're not actually paid per se for soil management as such. So there is a thought. Cross compliance comes that, but cross compliance is with BPS. That's moving out. So the thoughts are that we might then get eligibility across everybody to get SFI 2022 payments. But come with a go. Sorry.
SFI 22 will be available to everyone.
Yes.
George Eustace announced that in June. So yeah.
But this all comes with a health warning, of course. Like everything else, really. So, SFI 2022, 3 standards, arable and horticultural soils, grassland soils, uplands, and then the new animal health and welfare pathway. That's all been out in the press for a little while now. But you can see that what's coming is just a little drip, basically, compared to where we are. And my big concern is that, like everybody else probably in this room, is that we are seeing basic payment dropping away very, very fast within the next 2 or 3 years, but we really aren't seeing a huge amount of money coming back in straight away that we can cotton on to. Okay, and there's 2 more standards, at least 2 or more 3-point standards coming in. So, we've heard a lot about where we're heading with this. So all these things we've talked about today, and these are all going to become very, very important in terms of, or more important generally from the farming perspective, as to how we then start to really begin to hit these targets. So before I move on to any other questions before I move on to the next stage? I can smell those burgers, so I'm just going to keep going. Six months ago, DEFRA put out an ask for people to bid into a test and trial process, which was beginning to look at landscape recovery. So if you think back to my first slide there, we've got Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme 1 of environmental land management, local nature recovery, which may be something like higher tier, high level stewardship, with a bit of collaboration in there as well, and then Scheme 3, which is landscape recovery. So that's looking at a much bigger picture, if you like. And we put in a bid, that's through Eden Rivers Trust, and were successful in getting one of the 12 or so tests and trials that are being run nationally for the next 2 to 3 years. So ours has just started, and the plan is that we will be working, as part of my job, I work with 2 facilitation fund groups in the River Petrel and the Loudesman Leith, and we'll be going back to pest them again. Sorry, Paul, is he still here? To sort of come to their goodwill and help us take this forward. So we started off pre-lockdown investigating natural capital. We've heard that terminology a lot today with the groups, and at that time we were looking at, along with a company called Soil, SOYL, who you may be familiar with. They've done a lot in the arable sector over many, many years, looking at soil sampling and doing GPS data modelling as to how farms perform. You're looking at satellite data and then building up those layers year on year on year to sort of try and find out which are the good bits of the farms and which are the bad bits of the farms. We all know where they are, but we tend to kind of forget about them after a while. But this is beginning to actually then sort of look at how, if we're going to take these things forward, then how we identify which of the bits of the farm are really, really good, performing really well, and which of the bits of the farm are performing maybe not quite so well. And because we've had basic payment chucking in there and basically saying, yep, yeah, we can keep on funding the other bits of the farm that don't perform so well. As soon as you take BPS out of the equation and don't replace it with an awful lot in terms of SFI, then we've got to think about how we then make our farms, much more resilient. So we'll put those on there. Year one of our program is to effectively walk across all of those farms, map those natural capital features on the farm, identify areas like we've done today where we could enhance that existing natural capital, and also then where we can then create more natural capital on that farm. And the idea is that all that data is then going to be put onto what's called the farm app. Now, you'll have heard about the land app. There's quite a few about. We chose this one because we already part down the route with SOIL, and we're helping them develop from an arable package through to a grassland package. And so therefore, we just followed that natural pathway. And the idea is that we build up a massive database over the next year of natural capital assets on farm. Now, there's 30, 40 of us in this room here, and we will all have different ideas of what natural capital is. But as Peter has said, and as Chris has said, these are bits on our farm that basically we hopefully will drive our income in the future, whether it be a hedgerow, some woodland, some wetland, some buffer strips, your riparian strips along on the rivers or anything else, but things that we can then attribute a value to then go out into the marketplace. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And the one thing that we're now looking at now, and hopefully we'll have a phone app introduced in January, again by SOIL, that will enable you to effectively transfer data on your farm on a daily basis. So as part of the natural mapping and as part of the natural development, we want to then take this to the next continuing stages. So this will be an app which will be, you basically could, when you stop checking in the morning on your quad bike, and you think, well, I want to just take some photos of that hedge and measure, the good bits and the bad bits on it. I can do that on my phone, load it onto the app, come back into the office and load it onto the farm app, or bring it over to us and we'll load it on ourselves. So year two is the next stage, really. So having got that data in there, we then want to verify that data, just find out how true it is and how stable it is, and link that to drone data, which we have and which we'll be using as well. GIS data, which we have access to, bearing in mind that the soil data is based on GPS data, so that's satellite flyover data. So it's constantly changing. It's changing on every time the satellite flies over. We can pick up that data change. And then we intend to engage an external contractor to then assess the value of that natural capital, which Peter has talked about, obviously, with the carbon side of things, and Chris has mentioned as well, in terms of actually then beginning to say, how do we put a value of what we've got on the farm? And part of year two is also about creating those land management plans, which those of us who are involved with HLS in terms of the farm environmental plan will probably be something fairly similar. But where we're taking it is then saying, right, we've got the individual ones, but we put that into a landscape scale, because by that 50-odd farms, we will have that data that then links all those farms together and says, right, we've got X amount of habitat, livestock corridor, hedgerow, buffer strip, riparian, woodland, whatever there, which is creating that natural capital, to then go, as Peter's been saying, to identify the third-party funders who want to invest in that going forward. Because as we've seen with SFI, that's going to put some money in, and local nature recovery will hopefully put some more money in, but actually we still need the third-party investors in there, and DEFRA are well aware, and we've spoken about double funding and like that, but DEFRA has been well aware over the last few years that we need those third-party funders to come in and help, not just their businesses, but also the farm businesses that they're prepared to invest in. And then the final reports will go to DEFRA from there as to them what are what we've identified in terms of potential third-party funders are, what level are they prepared to invest in terms of that could be natural flood management benefit of hedges, or it could be phosphate and sediment trapping from hedges, or it could be additional riparian woodland, creating additional habitat, a whole range of things that would potentially be able to attract money back into the farming businesses. So we hope that on the back of all this, we can then aid not just those farmers who we're going to engage in over the next couple of years, but the wider farming community to say actually that there is potential here from assessing those assets on your farm and then being prepared to then evaluate them as to what they're worth to you, to then attract additional funding in on the market. And we can go down the route of the carbon side of things in terms of be careful what you sell away, because you may need that yourself, but at least it gives us an opportunity to then put a value on that, and for you could then to assess the market. And as we've said before, stewardship, all these things actually need to be treated as business assets that we can trade. They form part of our farm business setup. Part of our income profile within the business, not just the beef and the sheep and the arable and side of things, but all of this becomes an income stream that we then manage, and then we try and pull as many different fundings and different funding streams into farms in the future. So that's it. So thank you for listening anyway.